arrived." Marie-Jeanne, the children's nurse, peered out from her enfolding blankets, her face lined and old, but her eyes as bright as black buttons. Marie-Jeanne was nearly as dear to Hélène as Maman. Her comfortable face, so familiar and unchanging, always reassured the child, and in times of uncertainty or distress, her arms were always warm and sure. "I'm afraid not, Marie-Jeanne," replied Madame St Clair. "We're at an inn. Still, we should be able to get warm and have something to eat, which will make us all feel better." Gently, she woke the sleeping Louise, who complained miserably at being disturbed. The carriage door swung open, and Émile St Clair looked inside. He glared at Louise, who was still moaning, and immediately the child was silent.
"We'll stop here for a meal and then move on," he said to his wife. "I want to be in Paris tonight."
His family disentangled themselves from their rugs and clambered down from the coach. The bitter wind made them gasp, and Marie-Jeanne shepherded them hastily across the cobbled yard into the shelter of the inn. Monsieur St Clair engaged a private sitting-room on the first floor, and as they crowded into it, his daughters cried with delight at the sight of the roaring fire which had been kindled in the grate. Cloaks and muffs were discarded, and they clustered round the fire, stretching their frozen fingers to the heat. Hélène sat down on a tuffet by the hearth to bring her nearer to the flames, and, extending her feet towards the blaze, felt a delicious though painful prickling as the numbness left her toes and warmth crept back into her body.
"We can't stay long,"
her father warned them as he found them thus grouped round the fireplace a moment later.
"It may snow again, and we don't want to travel far in a snowstorm. We could really run into trouble then."
Madame St Clair thought privately that if it were about to snow again, it would be far better for them to stay at the inn overnight than hurrying onwards with no idea of what they might find at the end of their journey. Suppose the house was no longer there? After all, Paris had been bombarded. This fear had nagged her ever since they had set out from Saint-Étienne. The world had changed irrevocably since they were last at home in Paris, and she wished Émile had waited for answers to the letters he had sent before removing the family from the comparative safety of their country house. She had said as much to him, but he had remained adamant in his determination to return. When they had left the capital for Saint-Étienne in early July last year, it was merely to escape the summer heat in the dirty city. Even in the more fashionable quarters, like Passy, where they lived, the smell could become oppressive in August. They had expected to return in September as usual, and their house was left in readiness, with Gilbert and Margot, the butler and his wife, staying to look after it. But events had overtaken them. The declaration of war against Prussia a few days later, followed by the dramatic advance of the Prussian troops and humiliating defeats of the French armies sent to halt them, had kept the family in the safety of their country home. When Paris was besieged, entirely encircled by German troops, Rosalie and Émile St Clair thanked God they had taken their annual trip to the country as always, and thus escaped the horrors of being trapped in Paris. Rumours flew through the countryside. Parisians were dying like flies from starvation and disease, and the city's defenders, after abortive attempts at a sortie, could do little but tighten their belts and wait for relief from outside. That relief never came. The French armies had surrendered, leaving Paris to fend for herself, and the disgrace of those surrenders weighed heavily. Rosalie and Émile felt it as much as any. Their two sons were both with the army, and had been, as far as their parents knew, in the disastrous battle at Sedan, when Emperor Napoleon himself had been taken prisoner. But since then they had heard nothing. They did not even know for sure that Georges and Marcel were alive. Fear for the safety of her sons was another thing that haunted Rosalie. It was with her day and night,